Arthur Sterling was settled deep into his vintage leather armchair, absorbed in a quiet documentary about financial history, when his son-in-law, Derek, stormed into the living room and violently yanked the power cord from the wall, sneering, "Enough of this ancient garbage. In this house, we cultivate an atmosphere of future success, not the past." Yet, the sharpest pain for Arthur wasn't the arrogance of the intruder, but the sight of Emily standing in the doorway, after 14 months of living under her father's roof. His own daughter didn't utter a single word in his defense, merely averting her gaze and nodding in submissive agreement with her husband. Arthur said nothing, maintaining the icy composure of a man who had spent 40 years auditing criminals, and simply walked upstairs. However, a forensic calculation had been made in that silence, and the very next morning, the moment they left for the day, he made a single phone call that would dismantle their entire existence, ensuring that when they returned at sunset, their arrogance would be replaced by desperate, ceaseless pounding against a door that was no longer theirs. The click of the lock on the master bedroom door was soft, precise, and final. It was the sound of a border being drawn, a steel curtain falling between a chaos downstairs and the sanctuary of the last room Arthur Sterling could truly call his own. He did not throw himself onto the bed to weep. He did not pace the floor in a rage. He did not pick up the framed photograph of his late wife, Martha, to whisper apologies to the dead. Arthur was a forensic accountant, and in his world, emotion was a variable that clouded judgment. He needed clarity. He walked to his mahogany desk, the surface of which was one of the few places in the house that remained free of Derek's clutter, and sat down. From the inside pocket of his tweed jacket, Arthur produced a small, leather-bound notebook. He called it the ledger. For 40 years, he had used similar notebooks to dismantle the empires of embezzlers, money launderers, and corporate fraudsters. He placed it on the desk and uncapped his fountain pen. His hand did not shake. In neat, architectural script, he wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Below it, he logged a single entry. Time, 4:30 in the afternoon. Incident, physical aggression against property. Verbal intimidation. Complicity of Emily Vance. Arthur stared at the name of his daughter. The ink seemed to darken as it dried. That was the data point that refused to reconcile. For 14 months, he had categorized Emily as a victim, a woman battered by the emotional turbulence of a narcissistic husband. He had made excuses for her silence, classifying it as a survival mechanism. But today, standing in that doorway, she had not been a victim. She had been a witness who chose the side of the perpetrator. By nodding her head, she had signed off on his humiliation. It was a hard pill to swallow, but Arthur swallowed it dry. If she was an accomplice, he had to treat her as one. He could not save her until he neutralized the threat, and to do that, he needed to stop being a father and start being an auditor. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes to replay the scene in the living room. Why now? That was the question that nagged at him. Derek Vance was a lazy man. His cruelty was usually passive, born of entitlement rather than aggression. He was the type of man who left wet towels on the floor or ate the last of the leftovers without asking. But ripping a cable out of the wall, that was active. That was violent. In Arthur's experience, sudden escalation in behavior was rarely about the trigger event. It was never really about the television or the documentary. It was about stress. Panic. Derek was afraid. The aggression was a smokescreen, a loud noise designed to drown out the sound of something cracking beneath the surface. Men like Derek only lashed out when the walls were closing in, when they were trying to hide a deficit that was becoming too large to conceal. Arthur tapped his pen against the paper. What was Derek hiding? The man had been unemployed for 6 months, claiming to be building a startup that required endless hours of locked doors and hushed phone calls. Arthur had respected their privacy, adhering to the gentlemanly code that a father does not pry into his adult child's finances. That code had been severed the moment the cable snapped. Below the first entry, Arthur wrote a hypothesis. Subject is under acute financial pressure. Source unknown. Probability of concealment activity high. He checked his watch. 6:15 in the evening. Downstairs, the house had gone quiet, but it was a heavy, pregnant silence. He could imagine them in the kitchen. Derek would be drinking a beer, perhaps spinning the narrative to make himself the hero who finally stood up to the out-of-touch old man. Emily would be cooking dinner, moving around him on eggshells, trying to restore a peace that did not exist. Arthur felt a pang of hunger, but he ignored it. He would not eat with them tonight. He would not break bread with people who viewed him as an obstacle to be managed rather than a human being to be respected. The hours dragged on. Darkness fell outside the window, turning the glass into a black mirror reflecting a man who looked older than his 71 years. Arthur turned off the lamp, sitting in the dark, listening to the rhythms of his own home. He heard the television come back on downstairs, the volume low. The irony was bitter. Derek had claimed to want an intellectual atmosphere, yet the murmur of a mindless reality show drifted up through the floorboards. At 10 o'clock, he heard them coming up the stairs. Heavy footsteps first. Derek walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet. Then the lighter, hesitant steps of Emily. They paused outside his door. Arthur held his breath, sitting perfectly still in the darkness. He saw the shadow of feet under the door frame. "Leave him," Derek's voice was muffled but audible. "He is sulking. Let the baby sulk." "I just want to check," Emily whispered. "Don't. He needs to learn his place, Em. You coddle him too much. That is why he is like this." The shadows moved away. A door down the hall closed. The bathroom water ran. Then the bedroom door closed. Arthur let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He needs to learn his place. The phrase rattled in his mind. They thought his place was in the past, a silent financier of their lifestyle, a ghost haunting the guest room of his own life. They were wrong. His place was in the details. His place was in the evidence. He waited. Patience was the primary weapon of the forensic accountant. You do not chase the money, you wait for the money to reveal its path. He waited as the house settled. He waited as the wind picked up outside, rattling the oak trees he and Martha had planted 30 years ago. He waited until the digital clock on his nightstand read 2 o'clock in the morning. The silence was now absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic rumble of snoring coming from down the hall. Derek. He was asleep, arrogant enough to believe he had won, foolish enough to leave his guard down. Arthur stood up. His knees popped, a reminder of his age, but his mind was sharp, cold, and ready. He slipped off his loafers and put on a pair of soft woolen socks. He moved to the door and turned the lock back. The click was loud in the silence, sounding like a gunshot to his hypersensitive ears, but the snoring did not falter. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house was pitch black, a cavern of shadows. To anyone else, it might have been frightening, but Arthur knew every creak of these floorboards. He knew which step on the staircase groaned and which one held firm. He moved like smoke, drifting toward the spare bedroom that Derek had commandeered as his home office. This was not a father checking on his children. This was an auditor entering a crime scene. The emotional man who had been hurt by his daughter's betrayal was left behind in the master bedroom. The man walking down the hall was purely a creature of logic and law. He reached the door of the office. It was closed. He turned the handle, praying it was not locked. It turned. Of course it was unlocked. Arrogance. Derek believed Arthur was a harmless, broken old man who barely knew how to use a smartphone. He never imagined that the old man was coming for him. Arthur pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled of stale energy drinks and body spray. He approached the desk, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The audit had begun. Arthur stood amidst the ruins of what used to be his sanctuary. The air in the home office was heavy with the scent of stale pizza and a cloying, cheap body spray that Derek favored. His mahogany desk, once a pristine surface for serious work, was now cluttered with unopened mail, empty energy drink cans, and a half-eaten bag of chips. It was a physical manifestation of the rot that had infected his home, but Arthur did not waste time tidying up. He was here for the source of the infection. The laptop sat in the center of the mess, its lid closed, a sleeping beast waiting to be interrogated. It was a high-end model, purchased 6 months ago using funds Derek claimed were from a freelance consulting gig, though Arthur had never seen an invoice. He pulled the leather chair out, careful not to let the wheel squeak against the hardwood floor, and sat down. He opened the lid. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh, blue light across his face. A password prompt blinked at him. Arthur stared at the cursor. In his career, he had worked with IT specialists to crack encrypted drives of sophisticated embezzlers, but Derek Vance was not sophisticated. He was a creature of habit and ego. Arthur knew that men like Derek rarely looked outward for inspiration, they looked at what they owned. He tried the obvious first. He typed the name of the startup Derek had been talking about for 2 years. Access denied. He tried Derek's own birthday. Access denied. Arthur paused and looked around the room. His eyes landed on a framed photo on the bookshelf, pushed behind a stack of gaming magazines. It was Emily, smiling on her graduation day. Derek viewed Emily not as a partner, but as an asset, a possession that validated his existence. Arthur's fingers hovered over the keys. He typed his daughter's birthday, 061286. The screen unlocked instantly. The desktop background was a picture of a red Italian sports car, a childish aspiration for a man who could not pay his own car insurance. Arthur ignored it and opened the web browser. He was not interested in searching for illicit images or scandalous messages. He was hunting for the flow of capital. He knew that money always left a trail, no matter how carefully someone tried to sweep it away. He clicked on the History tab. The list of visited sites cascaded down the screen, a digital confession of a wasted life. There were no job search engines, no business news, no startup incubators. Instead, the screen was filled with names like Royal Flush Poker, DraftKings, and CryptoMoon Exchange. Arthur clicked on the most frequent link, an online casino. The browser automatically logged in, the password saved for convenience. Arthur navigated to the transaction history. His breath remained steady, but his jaw tightened. Withdrawals from the joint account he shared with Emily were being funneled here in increments of $500, $800, and sometimes over $1,000 at a time. The losses were staggering. In the last 3 months alone, Derek had gambled away nearly $12,000. This was where the grocery money went. This was why the house repairs were never done. But gambling debts were just a symptom of a lack of discipline. Arthur needed to find the mechanism of the fraud. He needed to know how Derek planned to sustain this hemorrhage when the savings ran dry. He minimized the browser and opened the email client. He typed a single search query into the bar, Dad. Nothing of interest appeared, mostly innocent forwards from Emily. Arthur deleted the search and tried again. He typed, House. Several emails appeared, but one caught his eye. It was a draft, saved 3 days ago, with no recipient address yet. The subject line read, Valuation and Liquidation Timeline. Arthur opened it. The text was brief but devastating. It was a query to a real estate agent asking how quickly a property could be listed and sold if the owner was incapacitated. Arthur felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He closed the draft and went to the sent folder. He needed to know if they had already moved on this plan. He scrolled back 2 weeks. There, buried between a receipt for online gaming credits and a subscription renewal, was an email sent to an address at Shady Pines Senior Living. The subject line was, "Admission inquiry for Arthur Sterling." Arthur clicked it open. The email was written in a tone of feigned concern. It described an elderly man who was becoming aggressive, forgetful, and a danger to himself and others. It claimed that the family could no longer manage his decline at home. It was a complete fabrication, a narrative constructed to strip him of his agency. But the text was not the worst part. There was an attachment. A PDF file named Power of Attorney signed. Arthur opened the file. On the screen, a legal document appeared, granting Derek Vance full control over Arthur's financial and medical decisions. He scrolled to the bottom of the last page. There, on the signature line, was his name. It was written in black ink, a close approximation of his handwriting, but to the eye of a forensic accountant, the flaws were glaring. The loop of the S was too tight. The pressure on the downstroke was too heavy. It was a forgery, likely traced from an old check or a birthday card. He stared at the signature. This was not just theft. This was an erasure. They were not just planning to take his money, they were planning to take his life, lock him away in a facility, and sell the home he had built with Martha, all to feed a gambling addiction and a delusion of grandeur. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive he had brought from upstairs. He plugged it into the side of the laptop. His movements were mechanical, precise. He dragged the email threads, the gambling receipts, the bank transfer logs, and the forged power of attorney document onto the drive. He waited for the progress bar to complete. 100%. He ejected the drive and put it in his pocket. He then took his smartphone and photographed the screen, capturing the open email and the forgery, ensuring he had a redundant physical copy of the digital evidence. He closed the applications one by one, returning the laptop to its original state. He wiped the trackpad and the keys with a tissue from his pocket to remove his fingerprints. Arthur stood up. The chair did not squeak. He looked around the messy room one last time. He had entered looking for answers, and he had found a declaration of war. The silence of the house felt different now. It was no longer peaceful, it was waiting. He checked his watch. It was now 4:15 in the morning. He had enough evidence to bury Derek Vance, but he needed to verify the numbers at the source. He needed to see the bank statements that Derek hid in his leather briefcase. He turned off the light and stepped back into the hallway, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket like a hot coal. The audit was far from over. Arthur moved silently from the office to the dining room where Derek often dumped his belongings with the careless entitlement of a teenager. The faux leather briefcase sat on the oak sideboard, a pretentious accessory for a man who had no office to go to and no clients to meet. Arthur approached it, his heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm that he registered but did not allow to affect his steady hands. He pressed the brass latches. They clicked open with a sound that seemed deafening in the pre-dawn stillness, but the house remained silent. Inside the briefcase, amidst a tangle of charging cables and crumpled fast food receipts, lay a thick envelope from the bank. It had been opened and shoved back in haphazardly. Arthur pulled it out and carried it to the kitchen, where the under-cabinet lighting provided just enough illumination without alerting the sleepers upstairs. He spread the documents on the granite countertop, placing his own small notebook beside them. He began the reconciliation process. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers, his mind automatically categorizing every transaction. He saw the transfers that matched the gambling losses he had found on the laptop, But there was something else, something larger and more systematic. There were a series of checks written to a company called Vance Home Solutions. Arthur paused. He had never heard of such a vendor, yet the name bore his son-in-law's surname, thinly veiled. He traced the dates. The first check was written 14 months ago, shortly after they moved in. The memo lines read basement waterproofing, roof repair, and foundation reinforcement. Arthur looked up at the ceiling. The roof had leaked during the last storm, staining the plaster in the hallway. The basement was as damp as it had ever been. No contractor had ever set foot on the property to perform major structural work. Arthur pulled a pen from his pocket and did the mental arithmetic. 5,000 here. 8,000 there. A massive withdrawal of 12,000 last month. The total sum of these fraudulent payments to a shell company amounted to $58,000. $58,000. That was not just spending money. That was the bulk of the emergency fund Arthur had set aside for his own long-term care. It was the safety net that was supposed to ensure he never became a burden to his daughter. Now, the net was gone, slashed by the very people he had tried to protect. A wave of nausea rolled over him, a physical reaction to the magnitude of the betrayal. For a moment, the auditor vanished, and he was just an old man standing in his kitchen, realizing that the people sleeping upstairs had looked him in the face every morning, eaten his food, and systematically hollowed out his future. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. The image of Emily nodding in the living room returned to him. Did she know about the fake company? Or did she simply sign whatever papers Derek put in front of her, too weak to ask where the money was going? Arthur took a deep breath, held it for 4 seconds, and exhaled. He pushed the emotion into a locked room in the back of his mind. There would be time for grief later. Now was the time for evidence collection. He took out his smartphone again. He photographed every single page of the bank statement, ensuring the check numbers and dates were legible. He photographed the envelope. He photographed the briefcase itself to establish context. When he was finished, he connected his phone to the portable hard drive one last time, initiating a backup of the new images. He watched the progress bar fill, verifying that the data was secure in 3 separate locations. With the precision of a surgeon closing an incision, Arthur returned the papers to the envelope. He placed the envelope back into the briefcase, arranging the crumpled receipts exactly as they had been. He wiped the brass latches with the edge of his sleeve. He walked back through the silent house, ascending the stairs as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the curtains. He entered his bedroom and locked the door. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. He did not get back into bed. He went to his closet and pulled out a suit, charcoal gray, freshly pressed. He laid out a crisp white shirt and a tie. Arthur sat in the armchair by the window, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood. The sadness was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He was no longer a victim. He was the plaintiff, the judge, and the jury. He checked his phone battery. It was fully charged. He scrolled to his contacts and found the number for Saul, his attorney. His finger hovered over the call button, but he did not press it yet. He would wait until they left. He would wait until the trap was perfectly set. The forensic calculation was complete, and the balance was due. At 8 o'clock sharp, the kitchen was filled with the tension of a drawn bowstring. Derek stood by the coffee maker, drumming his fingers on a granite counter with an impatient, staccato rhythm that grated on Arthur's nerves. He was wearing a navy suit that Arthur now knew had been purchased with funds stolen from the retirement account, the fabric shimmering with a sheen of unearned affluence. Emily moved around him like a ghost, avoiding Arthur's gaze as she packed a lunch she would likely not eat. Arthur sat at the small breakfast table, dressed in his charcoal suit, sipping black coffee. He did not speak. He did not ask Derek about his imaginary meetings or inquire about Emily's shift at the hospital. He simply observed them, cataloging their movements as he would a fluctuating stock ticker. "We are heading out," Derek announced, not looking at Arthur but addressing the room in general. "Don't wait up for us. We have a dinner reservation at the Ivy." Celebrating a breakthrough with the investors. The lie was smooth, practiced, and utterly transparent to Arthur now. There were no investors. There was only the casino and the slow siphoning of an old man's life savings. "Have a productive day," Arthur said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth or irritation Derek might have expected. It was the voice of a man reading a balance sheet. Emily paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She looked back at him for a fraction of a second, her eyes wide and fearful, perhaps sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the house. But she said nothing. The door closed. The lock clicked. The sound of the SUV engine roared to life in the driveway, then faded down the street. Arthur waited exactly 2 minutes. He walked to the window and watched until the vehicle turned the corner and vanished from sight. Then, he pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed. Saul answered on the first ring. "It is done," Arthur said. "Execute the protocols." "I have the petition ready for filing." Saul's voice was gravelly and reassuring. "The temporary restraining order will be in the system by noon. The bank has already frozen the joint accounts based on your affidavit." "Are you sure about the rest, Arthur?" "Once we pull this trigger, there is no one ringing the bell." "I am sure." "Send the security team." Arthur hung up. He did not sit down. He moved through the house with a terrifying efficiency. By 9 o'clock, a white van marked Sterling Security Solutions, no relation, pulled into the driveway. A technician named Miller, a man Arthur had used for sensitive corporate lockouts in the past, stepped out carrying a heavy toolbox. "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, nodding respectfully. "Same drill as the chaotic takeover in '98. "Stricter," Arthur replied. "Biometric deadbolts on all exterior doors. Reinforced strike plates. I want this house to be a fortress by 1 o'clock. "And Miller?" "No keys. I want code access and fingerprint recognition only." While Miller's drill began to scream against the wood of the front door, shredding the old locks that Derek had used with such arrogance, Arthur ascended the stairs to the guest bedroom. He brought with him 4 large, black suitcases he had retrieved from the attic. He stood in the center of the room. It smelled of Derek's cologne and Emily's lavender laundry detergent, a scent that used to remind Arthur of comfort but now smelled of complicity. He started with Derek's side of the closet. He pulled the suits off the hangers in bunches. He did not fold them. He did not care about wrinkles or creases. He threw them into the open maw of the first suitcase like he was disposing of contaminated evidence. The silk ties, the Italian leather shoes, the gaming consoles, all of it went in. These were not possessions, they were liabilities purchased with stolen equity. Arthur felt a grim satisfaction as he zipped the bag shut, the zipper straining against the bulk of Derek's unearned lifestyle. Then he turned to Emily's side. His movements slowed. The anger that had fueled his purge of Derek's belongings evaporated, replaced by a dull, aching weight in his chest. He reached for a beige cardigan, one he remembered buying her for her birthday 3 years ago. She had worn it the day she told him she was marrying Derek. He folded it carefully, aligning the sleeves with a precision that bordered on ritualistic. He packed her scrubs, her favorite books, and the small wooden jewelry box that had belonged to Martha. He opened the nightstand drawer and found a small, plush bear. Mr. Paws. She had kept it since she was 6 years old. Arthur held the bear for a long moment, his thumb brushing over the worn fur. This was the hardest part of the audit. To save the asset, You sometimes had to liquidate the sentiment. He placed the bear gently on top of the clothes and closed the suitcase. By noon, the house was transformed. The old brass locks lay in a pile of sawdust on the porch, replaced by sleek, black keypads that hummed with electronic menace. The 4 suitcases stood in a rigid line under the porch overhang, like soldiers guarding a border. Arthur paid Miller in cash and shook his hand. The van pulled away, leaving silence in its wake. Arthur walked back inside. He tested the front door. It locked automatically behind him with a heavy, mechanical thud. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He looked at the empty space on the counter where Derek's coffee maker had stood. He had packed that too. The house was clean. The evidence was secured. The legal machinery was grinding into motion downtown. All that was left was the waiting. Arthur checked his watch. It was 1 o'clock. In 5 hours, the sun would set. In 5 hours, they would return, expecting to walk into a home they thought they owned. Arthur went to the living room and sat in his leather armchair. He did not turn on the television. He did not read a book. He simply sat, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for the inevitable collision between the lies they told and the truth he had prepared. The sun began its descent behind the maple trees lining the street, casting long, skeletal shadows across the living room floor. Arthur Sterling sat in his armchair, a glass of Merlot resting untouched on the side table. He was not drinking. He needed his senses sharp. The wine was merely a prop, a symbol of the civilization he was reclaiming from the barbarians at his gate. At 6:12 in the evening, the familiar growl of Derek's leased SUV cut through the quiet neighborhood. Arthur did not flinch. He listened to the engine die, the heavy thud of car doors slamming, and the crunch of leather soles on the pavement. He could hear Derek's voice, loud and booming, likely bragging to Emily about the imaginary success of his dinner meeting. Arthur stood up. He smoothed the front of his jacket and walked to the hallway, stopping 5 feet from the front door. He waited. The sound of keys jingling outside was followed by the scrape of metal against metal. Then, a pause. Then, the scraping became more aggressive, a frantic scratching like a rat trying to claw through a wall. What the hell? Derek's voice was muffled by the heavy oak door. Maybe it is the wrong key, Emily suggested, her voice thin and anxious. It is the only key I have, Emily. It is not turning. It is blocked. The doorknob rattled violently. Then came the pounding. A fist hammered against the wood, once, twice, 3 times. Arthur, open this door. Derek shouted. I know you are in there. The lights are on. Stop playing games. Arthur took a breath. He stepped forward and unlocked the heavy deadbolt, but he kept the hardened steel security chain engaged. He opened the door exactly 4 inches. The slice of evening air that rushed in was cool. Through the gap, Arthur saw Derek's face, flushed red with irritation that was quickly curdling into rage. Emily stood behind him, clutching her purse, her eyes darting nervously between her husband and her father. What is this? Derek demanded, gesturing at the gap. Why is the chain on? And what happened to the lock? The lock has been upgraded, Arthur said. His voice was calm, the voice of a man reading a verdict. It requires a biometric scan now. Your fingerprints are not in a system. Open the door, Arthur. This is ridiculous. We have had a long day. You do not live here anymore, Arthur said. The silence that followed was absolute. Derek blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Emily let out a small, strangled gasp. Excuse me. Derek laughed, a sharp, barking sound. We live here. All our stuff is inside. Now take off this chain before I kick the door in." "Your belongings are not inside," Arthur corrected him. He pointed a finger toward the side of the porch, where the shadows were deepest. "Look to your left." Derek turned. Emily turned. There, lined up against the siding, were the 4 black suitcases Arthur had packed that morning. They stood like tombstones in the dim light. Next to them were 2 boxes containing their toiletries and the few personal items that did not fit in the luggage. "I packed everything myself," Arthur continued. "I was thorough. I even included your coffee maker, Derek. I know how much you value it." "You can't do this," Derek snarled, turning back to the door. He slammed his shoulder against the wood, but the reinforced chain held firm. Arthur did not step back. "Actually, I can." Arthur reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded document. He slid it through the crack in the door. It fluttered to the porch floor at Derek's feet. "That is a formal notice of eviction, effective immediately," Arthur said. It cites Section 4 of the Residency Act regarding immediate termination of tenancy due to criminal activity and fraud committed against the homeowner. "Fraud?" Emily whispered, stepping forward. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Ask your husband about the $58,000 he siphoned from my retirement accounts, Emily. Ask him about the gambling debts at Royal Flush Poker. Ask him about the application to Shady Pines nursing home where he forged my signature to have me committed." "Liar!" Derek screamed. "He is lying, Emily. The old man has lost his mind. He is senile. This is exactly why we need that power of attorney." "I have the bank statements, Derek," Arthur said, cutting him off. "I have the IP logs from your laptop. I have the emails you sent to the facility manager. I have forensic imaging of every transaction you made in the last 14 months. Derek's face went from red to a pale, sickly white. He looked at Emily, who was staring at him with a mixture of horror and confusion. "He is trying to divide us," Derek stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur. "He is jealous. He is a lonely, bitter old man who wants to ruin our happiness." Arthur looked at his daughter. This was the moment. The evidence was laid bare. The door was open, just a crack. All she had to do was ask to see the proof. All she had to do was step away from the man who was destroying her. "Emily," Arthur said softly. "Read the document. Look at the bank transfers." Emily looked at the paper on the ground. Then she looked at Derek. Derek grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to whiten her knuckles. "Don't listen to him," Derek hissed. "We are leaving. We are going to a hotel, and then I am calling a lawyer. We will sue him for illegal eviction. We will take this house, Emily. I promise you." Arthur waited. He watched his daughter's eyes fill with tears. He watched her look at the suitcases, then at her father's face through the narrow gap. "Dad, please," she sobbed. "Just let us in for tonight. We can talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about," Arthur said. "The audit is closed." Derek lunged at the door again, kicking the bottom panel with the heel of his expensive shoe. "Open the goddamn door." "I have already called the police," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. "They are 3 minutes away. If you are still on my property when they arrive, you will be arrested for trespassing. And given the fraud investigation that was opened this morning at the bank, I imagine they will be very interested to speak with you." Derek froze. The mention of the police pierced through his rage. He knew, deep down in the lizard part of his brain, that Arthur Sterling did not make idle threats. "You will regret this," Derek spat, backing away. "You will die alone in this big, empty house, old man. And nobody will care." Arthur looked him in the eye. Better alone than in the company of a thief. He closed the door. He did not slam it. He simply pushed it shut with a firm, decisive motion. The electronic lock engaged with a heavy, mechanical thud. He stood there for a moment, listening. He heard Derek screaming obscenities. He heard the sound of suitcases being dragged across the concrete. He heard Emily crying, a low, mournful sound that tore at his heart. But he did not open the door. He walked back to the living room and picked up his glass of wine. His hand was trembling slightly, but he took a sip. The wine was dry, complex, and tasted of iron. He walked to the window and watched through the blinds as the flashing blue lights of a patrol car turned onto the street, illuminating the chaos on his front lawn. The enforcement phase had begun. The arrival of the police cruiser did not immediately quell Derek's rage. If anything, it poured gasoline on the fire of his humiliation. As the blue and red strobe lights swept across the front lawn, illuminating the neighbors peering through their curtains, Derek grabbed one of the suitcases Arthur had packed. With a guttural roar, he swung it against the front door. The heavy luggage thudded uselessly against the reinforced wood, leaving a black scuff mark but failing to make even the biometric lock tremble. "This is my house." Derek screamed at the wood, his voice cracking. "Open this door right now." Arthur watched from the hallway window, his face impassive. He saw two uniformed officers step out of the vehicle. He recognized the older one, Officer Reynolds, a man who had patrolled this district for 20 years. Reynolds adjusted his belt and walked up the driveway with a deliberate, heavy gait, his partner trailing slightly behind with a flashlight beam cutting through the dusk. "Sir, step away from the door," Reynolds commanded, his voice calm but projecting authority that cut through Derek's hysterics. "Put the suitcase down." Derek spun around, his chest heaving. "Officer, thank God. You have to help us. My father-in-law has snapped. He has locked us out of our own home. He is having a mental breakdown. He is holding our property hostage." Officer Reynolds looked at Derek, taking in the flushed face, the expensive but disheveled suit, and the manic energy. Then he looked at Emily, who was standing by the pile of luggage, weeping silently into her hands. Finally, he looked at the house. Arthur opened the door. He did not hide behind the chain this time. He stepped out onto the porch, dressed impeccably in his charcoal suit, looking not like a senile old man, but like a CEO presiding over a board meeting. In his hand, he held a thick, color-coded file folder. The Arthur file. "Mr. Sterling," Officer Reynolds said, touching the brim of his cap. "We received a call about a disturbance." "I made the call, officer," Arthur said, his voice steady. "And I believe my son-in-law here is currently trespassing on private property." "Trespassing?" Derek shouted, stepping forward until Reynolds put a hand on his chest to stop him. "I have lived here for 14 months. I have rights. You can't just kick us out because you forgot to take your medication." "Officer," Arthur said, ignoring Derek completely. He handed the file to Reynolds. "Inside, you will find a copy of the deed to this property, solely in my name. You will also find a copy of the notarized affidavit regarding the $58,000 Mr. Vance has embezzled from my accounts over the last year. And most importantly, on the top page, you will find a temporary restraining order granted by Judge Halloway this afternoon, barring Mr. Vance from coming within 100 yards of this residence or my person due to documented financial abuse and aggressive behavior." Reynolds opened the file. He clicked on his flashlight, scanning the documents. The silence stretched out, broken only by the static from the police radio and Emily's soft sobbing. Derek watched the officer's face, his arrogance wavering as he saw Reynolds nod slowly. "Mr. Vance," Reynolds said, closing the folder. "Is this your signature on the eviction notice Mr. Sterling's lawyer served?" I didn't sign anything," Derek stammered. The officer looked at Arthur. Electronic service was confirmed at 4 o'clock today, Arthur stated. Sent to his primary email and phone. Reynolds turned back to Derek. His demeanor shifted from mediator to enforcer. Mr. Vance, the documentation here is clear. You have been legally trespassed and served a restraining order. This is no longer a civil dispute, it is a criminal matter if you remain on this property. You need to take your belongings and leave immediately. But, where are we supposed to go? Derek asked, his voice shrinking. We have nowhere to go. That is not Mr. Sterling's problem, Reynolds said. Grab your bags. If you are not in your vehicle in 2 minutes, I will place you under arrest for violating a court order. Derek stood frozen, his mouth agape. He looked at the house, then at the officers, and finally at Arthur. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The game was over. The bluff had been called. Fine, Derek spat. He grabbed 2 of the suitcases, his movements jerky and angry. Come on, Emily. We are leaving. We are not staying where we are not wanted. Arthur watched Derek stump toward the SUV. Then, he turned his gaze to his daughter. Emily stood alone on the walkway, illuminated by the harsh glare of the porch light. She looked small, shattered, caught between the father who had raised her and the husband who had consumed her. Emily, Arthur said softly. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. The restraining order is for him, Arthur said. Not for you. You can stay. Your room is ready. You do not have to go with him. It was the lifeline. The final offer. Arthur held his breath, praying that the forensic evidence he had presented, the theft, the lies, the betrayal, was enough to break the spell. He waited for her to walk up the steps. He waited for her to choose dignity. Emily looked at the open door. She looked at the warm light spilling from the hallway where she had grown up. Then she looked at the dark driveway, where Derek was slamming the trunk of the car, shouting for her to hurry up. He needs me, Dad, she whispered. He has nobody else. He stole from us, Emily, Arthur said, his voice cracking for the first time. He tried to have me committed. He is sick, she said, wiping her face. He just needs help. I can't leave him when he is down. I promised. She picked up her suitcase. She did not look at Arthur again. She turned and walked down the driveway, her posture slumped in defeat. She walked past the police officers, past the neighbors watching from the shadows, and climbed into the passenger seat of the SUV. The engine roared. The car backed out of the driveway, tires screeching slightly as Derek peeled away in a final act of impotent aggression. Officer Reynolds watched them go, then turned back to Arthur. I am sorry it had to go that way, Mr. Sterling, Reynolds said quietly. But the order is in the system. If he comes back, call us. We will pick him up. Thank you, officer, Arthur said. The police got back into their cruiser. The blue lights died, returning the street to the amber glow of the street lamps. The neighbors retreated into their homes. Arthur stood alone on his porch. He looked at the empty driveway. The silence that descended was absolute, heavier than any silence he had ever known. He had won the house. He had secured the assets. He had balanced the ledger. But as he stepped back inside and closed the reinforced door, locking out the night, Arthur Sterling realized that for the first time in his life, the cost of the truth might have been too high to bear. The house was safe, but it was empty. The house was not just empty, it was a museum of a life interrupted. For 3 days, Arthur moved through the rooms like a ghost haunting his own property. He woke at 6, drank his coffee in silence, and went to his study. He did not turn on the television. The cable box, repaired by a technician the morning after the incident, sat untouched, a black monolith of useless entertainment. But Arthur was not idle. He was a man of action, and action required information. On the morning of the fourth day, a Thursday, a man named Mr. Graves arrived in a nondescript gray sedan. Mr. Graves was a private investigator Arthur had used during his forensic accounting days to locate hidden assets. He was expensive, discreet, and dangerously efficient. They sat in the living room. Graves placed a manila envelope on a coffee table. "They are at the Starlight Motel on Route 9, Graves said, his voice gravelly from years of cheap cigarettes. "Room 12. It is a weekly rental place. Cash only. Not exactly the Ritz." Arthur nodded. He knew the place. It was a haven for transients, drug dealers, and people whose lives had imploded. "And their finances?" Arthur asked. Graves opened the folder. He laid out photographs taken with a telephoto lens. One showed Derek arguing with a clerk at a liquor store. Another showed Emily sitting on the curb outside the motel room, smoking a cigarette, her face gaunt and exhausted. "They are burning through cash," Graves reported. "He has been hitting the local casinos every night. Lost $300 at the slots yesterday. He is pawning things now. I saw him take a watch to a shop downtown." Arthur felt a pang of nausea. The watch. It was a vintage Omega, a gift Arthur had given Derek for his 40th birthday, hoping to inspire punctuality and responsibility. Now it was just another asset being liquidated to feed a sickness. "And Emily?" Arthur asked, his voice tight. "She is working double shifts at the hospital," Graves said. "But I saw him take her debit card from her purse this morning before she left. She tried to stop him. He shoved her. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but enough to make her back down." Arthur closed his eyes. The image of his daughter being shoved by that man burned in his mind. He wanted to drive to the motel right now, kick down the door, and drag her home. But he knew it would fail. An intervention without leverage was just noise. Emily had to reach her own breaking point. She had to see Derek for what he truly was, without the buffer of Arthur's money or the safety of Arthur's home. "Keep watching them," Arthur said, opening his checkbook. "Document everything. Especially the aggression. If he lays a hand on her, you call the police first, then me." Graves nodded, pocketing the check. "You are playing a dangerous game, Arthur. Desperate men do desperate things." "I am counting on it," Arthur replied. That afternoon, Arthur went to the bank. He sat in the office of the branch manager, a woman named Sarah who had known him for 20 years. "Freeze everything," Arthur instructed. "The joint account with Emily. The credit cards in her name that I co-signed. The emergency fund. Everything." Sarah hesitated. "Arthur, this will leave her with nothing. If she tries to buy groceries or gas, it will be declined," Arthur finished. "I know," he signed the authorization forms with a steady hand. It felt cruel, like cutting off a limb to save a body, but it was necessary. Derek was a parasite. As long as there was a host to feed on, he would never detach. By cutting off the money, Arthur was starving the parasite. He was forcing Derek to show his true nature when the resources ran dry. When he returned home, the sun was setting. The house felt colder than usual. Arthur sat in his armchair and waited. He checked his phone every 10 minutes, half expecting a call from Emily screaming at him, begging him to unlock the cards. But the phone remained silent. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that covered the house. Arthur knew what was happening. Derek would be at the checkout line or at the ATM, and the card would be rejected. he would explode. He would blame the bank, then he would blame Emily, and finally, inevitably, he would blame Arthur. Arthur looked out the window at the darkening street. He saw the neighborhood settling in for the night. Lights flickered on in living rooms. Families sat down to dinner. But in a motel room on Route 9, a storm was brewing. Arthur could feel it in his bones. He checked the locks on the front door again. He checked the security camera feed on his tablet. The green light blinked steadily. He was ready. He had set the trap. Now he just had to wait for the animal to spring it. The silence of the house was shattered at exactly 2:14 in the morning. It was not the subtle click of a lock or the creak of a floorboard. It was the violent, jagged sound of impact followed by the cascading shimmer of breaking glass. A heavy projectile had breached the sanctity of the living room window downstairs. Arthur Sterling was awake instantly. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a primal reaction to danger, but his mind remained coldly analytical. He did not turn on the bedside lamp. To illuminate himself would be to present a target. Instead, he slid out of bed, his feet finding the floor with practiced stealth. He grabbed his smartphone from the nightstand and moved to the window overlooking the driveway, peering through the slats of the blinds. The scene below was illuminated by the harsh, sodium orange glow of the street lamp. Derek's SUV was parked haphazardly on the front lawn, the tires tearing deep ruts into the grass Arthur had meticulously tended for 20 years. The driver's side door hung open. Derek Vance stood in the center of the driveway. He was swaying, his balance compromised by a significant quantity of alcohol. In his left hand, he clutched a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey. In his right, he held a can of spray paint. Arthur unlocked his phone and opened the camera app. He switched to video mode and pressed record. The red timer began to count up from 0, thief. Derek screamed at the dark house, his voice slurring and cracking with impotent rage. "You stole my money. You stole my life, you old leech." Derek raised the can and unleashed a stream of crimson paint across the pristine white door of the garage. He wrote a crude obscenity in jagged, dripping letters. It was not an act of calculated intimidation, it was a tantrum. It was the behavior of a man who had realized he was powerless and had decided to destroy what he could not control. Arthur zoomed in. The lens captured the license plate of the SUV. It captured the spray paint can. It captured Derek's face, contorted with hatred and tears. Arthur felt a strange detachment as he watched. He was not looking at a family member anymore. He was looking at a liability. He was documenting a crime. Derek hurled the empty paint can at the house. It clattered uselessly against the brickwork. Then he turned back to the garden bed and ripped up a heavy landscaping stone. With a grunt of exertion, he threw it. The sound of the second window shattering was louder than the first. The stone crashed into the dining room, likely destroying the china cabinet Martha had loved. Arthur winced, but he did not shout. He did not open the window to engage. He knew exactly what Derek wanted. Derek wanted a fight. He wanted Arthur to come down to the lawn so he could turn this into a physical brawl, something he could spin to the police as mutual combat or self-defense. Arthur would not give him that satisfaction. He would stay in his fortress, high above the chaos, and let the camera do the work. "Come out," Derek bellowed, stumbling toward the front porch. "Come out and face me." He reached the front door and began to kick it. The heavy thud of his boot against the reinforced wood echoed through the house, but the biometric locks held firm. The door did not budge an inch. It was an immovable object meeting a very weak force. Arthur moved to the landline on his desk, keeping the smartphone camera trained on the window. He dialed 911. "Address is 42 Maple Drive," Arthur said, his voice level. I have an intruder on the premises committing felony vandalism. The subject is Derek Vance. He is intoxicated, hostile, and in violation of an active restraining order. I have video evidence." He hung up. Below, Derek seemed to realize the futility of his assault. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the sluggishness of the alcohol. He leaned his forehead against the door he could not open, sobbing now, a pathetic sound that drifted up to the second-floor window. Then, perhaps sensing the approaching sirens that were still silent in a distance, panic took over. Derek stumbled back to his SUV. He fell once on the grass, scrambling up on hands and knees like a frightened animal. He threw himself into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. He threw the car into reverse, clipping Arthur's mailbox and sending it spinning into the street before peeling away into the darkness. Arthur stopped the recording. The video file was 3 minutes and 12 seconds long. He immediately uploaded the file to his cloud storage. Then he emailed a copy to Saul and another to Officer Reynolds. Redundancy was key. Only then did Arthur go downstairs. He turned on the lights. The living room was a mess of shattered glass and cold night air. The stone sat in the middle of the dining room floor surrounded by the fragments of Martha's wedding china. The garage door was defaced with red paint. Arthur looked at the destruction. It would cost thousands to repair. The china was irreplaceable. But as he looked at the jagged hole in the window, Arthur did not feel defeated. He felt validated. Derek had just escalated his own case from a civil dispute to a criminal felony. He had handed Arthur the final nail for the coffin. Arthur went to the kitchen, swept up the glass near the entryway, and made a pot of coffee. He would not sleep again tonight. He had a police report to file, and he needed to be awake when they came to arrest the man who had just destroyed his own future. The petty revenge had been expensive, but the return on investment would be total victory. The morning sun did not bring warmth to 42 Maple Drive, it only illuminated the scars. Arthur Sterling spent the hours between dawn and 9 o'clock sweeping up the shards of his life. He swept the glass from the dining room floor, the remnants of the window Derek had shattered. He swept the dried mud from the foyer where the police officers had tracked in the dirt of the night before. He scrubbed the red spray paint on the garage door with harsh chemicals until his hands were raw and the air smelled of solvent, but the faint, pinkish outline of the obscenity remained, a ghost of Derek's rage. At 10 o'clock, the phone in the kitchen rang. It was Saul. Arthur wiped his hands on a rag and answered. He expected good news. He expected to hear that Derek Vance was currently wearing an orange jumpsuit, awaiting arraignment for felony vandalism, driving under the influence, and violation of a protective order. He expected the system to work. "He is out, Arthur," Saul said without preamble. His voice was heavy, lacking its usual professional detachment. Arthur gripped the edge of the counter. "Out. That is impossible. The bail schedule for those charges combined would be at least $5,000. Derek does not have 5,000 cents. He did not pay it," Saul said quietly. Emily did. The silence that filled the kitchen was profound. Arthur closed his eyes, feeling a physical pain in his chest that had nothing to do with his age. Emily. His daughter. The woman whose college tuition he had paid for, whose scraped knees he had bandaged, whose moral compass he thought he had calibrated so carefully. She had taken the last scraps of her financial independence, money she likely pulled from a hidden emergency reserve or perhaps even a payday loan, and she had used it to free the monster who had just attacked her childhood home. She was at the precinct at 8:30 this morning, Saul continued, reading from a note. She paid in cash. She looked unwell, Arthur. The desk sergeant said she was shaking. She took him back to the motel. Arthur slowly sat down on the kitchen stool. He had miscalculated. As a forensic accountant, he operated on logic. Theft plus evidence equals conviction. Betrayal plus revelation equals separation. But he had forgotten the one variable that defied logic: trauma bonding. Emily was not acting as a rational agent. She was a hostage falling in love with her captor, believing that if she just sacrificed enough, if she just loved him hard enough, he would return to being the man he pretended to be. "She is an accessory to her own destruction," Arthur whispered. "Arthur, listen to me," Saul said. "You have done enough. You secured the house. You secured your assets. You can walk away now. Let them spiral. If you push harder, you might lose her forever." "No," Arthur said, his voice hardening. "If I walk away now, she drowns. I have to break the cycle, Saul. I have to show her the one thing she cannot forgive." He hung up the phone. Arthur went to his study. He opened the floor safe hidden beneath the rug. Inside, resting on top of his will and the deed to the house, was a single manila envelope. This was the nuclear option. He had held it back during the confrontation at the door, hoping the financial fraud would be enough. He had held it back because he knew that once Emily saw this, it would break her heart in a way that could never be fully mended. He took the envelope to his desk. Inside were the printed emails between Derek and the administrator of Shady Pines Nursing Home. There was the application form, filled out in Derek's handwriting, listing Arthur's advanced dementia and violent tendencies as reasons for immediate involuntary commitment. There was the forged power of attorney document designed to strip Arthur of his rights and sell the house out from under him. But there was one more document Arthur had found on the laptop, one he had not even shown the police yet because it was too personal. It was a draft email from Derek to a real estate developer. It read, "Once the old man is in the facility, I can sign the deed over. I need a quick cash sale. I don't care if it is below market value. I need the liquidity by November 1st. November 1st. That was 3 days away. Derek had not just planned to steal money, he had planned to sell Emily's inheritance and erase her father's existence for a quick payout. And he had claimed in the emails that Emily was on board, but too emotional to handle the paperwork. Arthur knew his daughter. She could forgive a gambling debt. She could perhaps even forgive the vandalism, blaming it on alcohol. But she could not forgive a premeditated conspiracy to imprison her father and sell her home behind her back. That was not a mistake, that was malice. Arthur placed the documents into a fresh, stiff cardboard envelope. He addressed it clearly to Emily Vance. Memorial Hospital, Pediatric Wing. Private and confidential. He did not drive it there himself. Derek might be watching, or Emily might refuse to see him. Instead, he called a courier service. He paid for the expedited, signature-required delivery. At 11:30, a bike courier arrived to pick up the package. Arthur handed it over, feeling the weight of it leave his hands. It was lighter than air, yet it carried the force of a wrecking ball. "Make sure she signs for it personally," Arthur told the courier, handing him a $20 tip. "Do not leave it at the front desk." "Understood, sir." Arthur watched the courier pedal away down the leaf-strewn street. The net was tightening. He had stripped Derek of his home, his money, and his reputation. Now, he was about to strip him of his last and most valuable shield, Emily's loyalty. Arthur went back inside and poured a cup of cold coffee down the sink. He checked his watch. It would take 20 minutes to reach the hospital. The explosion would be silent, but the shockwave would be felt all the way to the Starlight Motel. The fluorescent lights of the pediatric break room hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz that Emily Vance had learned to ignore over 12 years of nursing. She sat at a small, round table, her hands trembling as she held the stiff cardboard envelope the courier had delivered 20 minutes ago. It was addressed in her father's handwriting, the script precise and unwavering, a stark contrast to the chaos her life had become in the last 5 days. She opened the tap. Inside was a stack of papers clipped together with a single, silver binder clip. There was no note, no letter of explanation, just the documents themselves. Arthur Sterling did not believe in leading the witness. He believed the evidence should speak for itself. Emily began to read. The first page was an email printout dated August 12. The sender was Derek Vance. The recipient was an admission director at Shady Pines, a state-funded facility known for its grim conditions and overcrowding. Subject: immediate placement required. Emily read the body of the text. Her breath caught in her throat. Derek described her father, the man who still did the Sunday crossword puzzle in pen, as suffering from advanced cognitive decline and aggressive outbursts. He claimed that Arthur was a danger to himself and the family. He claimed that she, Emily, was terrified of him and had given her full consent for involuntary commitment. Lies. All of it. She flipped the page. It was a scanned application form. On the line for next of kin's signature, she saw her own name signed in a looping scrawl that looked nothing like her hand. Next to it was a forged power of attorney document, granting Derek full control over Arthur's estate, including the right to liquidate real property. And there it was, on the final page. An email to a developer named Miller. "I can get the old man out by November 1st, Derek had written. "The house needs some work, but the land is worth a fortune. I need a quick cash closing. I have debts to cover, and once he is in the home, the deed is mine to sign." Emily felt the room spin. She had defended Derek when he stole the money, telling herself it was just an addiction, a sickness he could not control. She had defended him when he vandalized the house, blaming the alcohol and the stress of the eviction. She had emptied her savings account this morning to bail him out because she believed he was a good man who had made bad choices. But this was not a mistake. This was a plan. For 3 months, while he sat at Arthur's dinner table and ate his food, Derek had been plotting to lock her father away in a warehouse for the dying and sell her childhood home to pay off his gambling debts. He had used her name to do it. She stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the linoleum. She grabbed her purse and the envelope. She walked out of the break room, past the nurse's station, and told the charge nurse she was leaving. She did not wait for permission. The drive to the Starlight Motel took 15 minutes. Emily did not remember the traffic or the stoplights. She only remembered the burning sensation in her chest, the feeling of a blindfold being ripped away after years of darkness. She pulled into the parking lot of the motel. It was a desolate place on the edge of town, peeling paint and rusted railings. Derek's SUV was parked outside room 12, the front bumper still dented from hitting Arthur's mailbox the night before. Emily walked to the door and used her key card. The lock buzzed, and she pushed inside. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and fast food. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the afternoon sun. Derek was lying on the bed, still wearing the clothes he had been arrested in, staring at the ceiling. He looked over as she entered, offering a weak, lopsided smile. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice raspy. "You are home early. Did you bring any food? I am starving." Emily did not answer. She walked to the foot of the bed and threw the packet of documents onto his chest. The papers fanned out, sliding over his shirt. "What is this?" Derek asked, sitting up. He picked up the top page. His eyes scanned the email header. The color drained from his face instantly. "You were going to put him in a home," Emily said. Her voice was quiet, trembling with a rage she had never felt before. "You were going to lock him away." Derek stared at the paper. He licked his lips, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit or a lie that would fit. Listen, he started, holding up a hand. You do not understand. He is old. That house is too big for him. It is dangerous. He is 71. Emily shouted. He is sharper than you are. He runs 3 miles a week. He does his own taxes. He is selfish. Derek yelled back, the mask slipping. He sits in that mansion with all that money while we struggle. We deserve a life too, Emily. We are young. We need that capital to start over. So you forged my signature. You told him I agreed to it. It was for us. Derek stood up, the papers scattering onto the dirty carpet. I did it for us. I needed the money to fix the mess I made, okay? I was going to pay it back. Once the startup took off, I was going to get him out. I swear. You are a liar, Emily whispered. You are a thief and a liar. My father was right. He was right about everything. Don't you dare take his side, Derek snarled. He took a step toward her. His face twisted into a sneer that Emily did not recognize. It was the face of the man who had smashed the windows on Maple Drive. That old man poisoned you against me. He wants to control you. He wants to keep you his little girl forever. He was protecting me from you. Protecting you. Derek laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I am the victim here, Emily. I am the one who lost everything. And now you come in here with your high and mighty attitude and judge me? After everything I have done for you. He grabbed a glass lamp from the bedside table and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall just inches from Emily's head, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Emily flinched, covering her face with her hands. She backed away until her shoulders hit the door. For the first time in their 5-year marriage, she looked at her husband and saw a stranger. She saw the violence simmering just beneath the surface of his charm. She realized that the vandalism at her father's house had not been an anomaly. It was a preview. Get out, Derek hissed, breathing hard. If you are going to stand there and look at me like I am a monster, then get out. Go run back to Daddy. See if he takes you back after you chose me. I paid your bail, Emily said, tears streaming down her face. I used every cent I had left. And that is the least you could do. Derek screamed. He kicked the bed frame, the metal screeching against the floor. Emily fumbled for the doorknob behind her back. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn it. She opened the door and stepped out into the cool air of the parking lot. She did not look back. She ran to her car, locked the doors, and sat there, hyperventilating. She looked at the motel room door. It remained closed. Derek had not come after her. He was in there, stewing in his own failure and rage. Emily started the car. She put it in reverse and drove away, leaving the Starlight Motel behind. But as she merged onto the highway, a terrifying thought settled in her mind. She had seen the look in his eyes when the lamp shattered. He was not just angry, he was desperate. And a desperate man with nothing left to lose was capable of anything. The crack in their marriage had finally become a chasm, and Emily was terrified that she was not on the other side of it yet. She was falling into it. The storm that had been threatening the coast all afternoon finally broke over the suburbs just after midnight. Rain lashed against the windows of 42 Maple Drive like handfuls of gravel thrown by an invisible hand, and thunder rattled the frames in a way that mimicked the violence of the last week. Arthur Sterling lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl. He had not slept well since the day the locks were changed. His house was secure, his assets were frozen, and his legal standing was impregnable, yet he felt a profound, knowing unease that no spreadsheet could balance. At 12:43 in the morning, the phone on his nightstand lit up the dark room. The silence of the house was shattered by the shrill, electronic ringtone. Arthur snatched the device before the second ring, his heart already hammering a warning against his ribs. The caller ID displayed a single name, Emily. He swiped the screen and pressed the phone to his ear. Emily. Dad, her voice was not a scream. It was a whisper, thin and terrified, barely audible over the sound of something heavy slamming against a hollow surface in the background. Dad, help me. Please. Arthur sat up, throwing the covers aside. Where are you? I am at the motel, she sobbed, her breath hitching in short, panic-induced gasps. I came back to get my clothes. I thought he was gone. I thought he was at the casino. But he was waiting. He was waiting in the dark. A crash echoed through the phone line, loud enough to make Arthur wince. It sounded like wood splintering under the force of a shoulder or a boot. Open the door. Derek's voice roared in the background, distorted by rage and proximity. I know you are talking to him. Open the door, Emily, or I will break it down. He is trying to get in, Emily whispered, the terror in her voice spiking. I am in the bathroom. I locked it, but the frame is weak. Dad, he has a knife. I saw it on the table. He said if I leave him, nobody else will have me. Arthur was already moving. He did not put on his suit. He did not look for his notebook. He grabbed the keys to his truck from the dresser and shoved his feet into his shoes. The forensic accountant who measured risks and calculated liabilities vanished. In his place was a father, fueled by a primal, terrifying clarity. Stay on the line, Emily, Arthur commanded, his voice turning into steel. Do not hang up. I am coming. I am 10 minutes away. He ran down the stairs, ignoring the pain in his knees. He moved through the kitchen and grabbed the heavy tire iron he kept in a utility drawer for emergencies. It was a brutal, primitive tool, unsuited for a man of his refinement, but tonight was not about refinement. It was about survival. He threw open the front door and sprinted into the rain. The wind tore at his pajamas, soaking him instantly, but he did not feel the cold. He climbed into his truck, the engine roaring to life with a turn of the key. He threw the vehicle into reverse, backing out of the driveway with a speed that would have terrified his former self. Dad, the door is cracking. Emily screamed into the phone. He is kicking it. Arthur merged onto the main road, ignoring the red light at the intersection. The streets were slick with rain, the street lamps blurring into streaks of orange light. He pressed the speakerphone button and tossed the device onto the passenger seat so he could drive with both hands. I am driving, Emily. Keep talking to me. How long has he been drinking? Since yesterday, she cried. He drank everything. He is crazy, Dad. He is not Derek anymore. He is a monster. Another crash. Then the sound of shattering porcelain. You think you are better than me? Derek screamed, his voice closer to the phone now. You think you can just walk away? You owe me. You owe me for everything. Arthur gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He reached for the phone again and dialed 911 on the keypad, merging the call. Emergency services, what is your location? The dispatcher asked calmly. My name is Arthur Sterling, Arthur shouted over the roar of the engine and the rain. I am reporting an act of domestic assault in progress at the Starlight Motel, room 12. The assailant is armed with a knife. The victim is trapped in the bathroom. I am the father. I am 5 minutes out. Sir, we have units dispatching now. Do not enter the premises. Wait for law enforcement to secure the scene." "I am not waiting," Arthur said. He hung up on the dispatcher but kept the line open with Emily. "Emily, are you there?" "Dad, the hinge." "The top hinge is gone." Arthur pressed the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward, hydroplaning slightly before the tires found grip. He saw the neon sign of the Starlight Motel in the distance, flickering pink and buzzing against the stormy sky. It looked like a beacon of hell. He turned into the parking lot on two wheels, the tires screeching against the wet asphalt. He saw Derek's SUV parked crookedly in front of room 12. The door to the room was standing wide open, light spilling out onto the wet pavement. Arthur slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just inches from the bumper of the SUV. He grabbed the tire iron from the passenger seat. He did not wait for the police sirens that were wailing in the distance. He stepped out into the rain, the water running down his face, mixing with the sweat of his fear. He heard a scream from inside the room. It was Emily. Arthur ran. He charged toward the open door of room 12, a 71-year-old man with a heart full of love and a hand full of iron, ready to face the demon that had come to claim his daughter. Arthur charged through the open door of room 12, the rain-slick tire iron gripped so tightly in his hand that his knuckles were white. The interior of the motel room was a chaotic landscape of destruction. The television was smashed on the floor, the mattress was overturned, and the air was thick with the copper scent of terror. In the far corner, the bathroom door hung on a single hinge, the wood splintered around the lock. Derek Vance stood in the opening, his back to the entrance. He had Emily by the hair, dragging her out of the small, tiled sanctuary as she clawed uselessly at his hands, her screams raw and guttural. "Get off her!" Arthur roared. The sound tore from his throat, a primal command that carried 71 years of suppressed rage. Derek spun around, releasing his grip on Emily just enough for her to scramble backward against the bathtub. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, and unfocused. In his right hand, the glint of a steak knife caught the flickering light of the hallway lamp. He looked at Arthur, and a twisted grin spread across his face. "You came," Derek slurred, swaying on his feet. "The hero. The great Arthur Sterling. You want to save her. You want to take her back to your castle." He took a step toward Arthur, the knife raised. "You ruined me, old man. You took my money. You took my house. Now I am going to take something of yours." Arthur did not back down. He did not calculate the odds. He did not think about the fact that Derek was 30 years younger, stronger, and fueled by a psychotic cocktail of alcohol and desperation. Arthur saw only the weapon and his daughter cowering on the floor. "Drop the knife, Derek," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly steady. "This ends now." "Make me," Derek spat. He lunged. It was a clumsy, telegraphed movement, but it was fast. Arthur tried to sidestep, but his age betrayed him. He wasn't fast enough. Derek collided with him, the force of the impact sending Arthur staggering back against the dresser. The edge of the wood dug into his spine, and a sharp pain flared in his shoulder where Derek's free hand had shoved him. The knife slashed through the air, missing Arthur's chest by inches, slicing through the fabric of his wet pajama sleeve and drawing a thin line of blood on his forearm. "Dad!" Emily screamed from the floor. The sight of his own blood, the sting of the cut, flicked a switch in Arthur's brain. The fear evaporated. In its place was cold, hard resolution. He was not a fighter, but he was a man who understood leverage. As Derek pulled his arm back for a second strike, Arthur swung the tire iron. He did not aim for the head, he was not a murderer. He aimed for the structure. He swung the heavy iron bar in a low, vicious arc, putting every ounce of his remaining strength into the blow. The iron connected with the side of Derek's right knee with a sickening crunch of bone meeting metal. Derek howled, a sound of pure agony that drowned out the storm outside. His leg buckled instantly, unable to support his weight. He collapsed to the dirty carpet, the knife clattering from his hand and sliding under the overturned bed. He clutched his knee, rolling on the floor, cursing and sobbing. Arthur stood over him, breathing heavily, his chest heaving. He kicked the tire iron away, out of reach, but kept his eyes fixed on the man writhing on the floor. "Stay down," Arthur gasped. "Do not move." He looked past Derek to the bathroom. Emily was crawling toward him, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her neck red where Derek had grabbed her. Arthur reached out his uninjured arm, and she grasped his hand, pulling herself up. She buried her face in his wet shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. "I have got you," Arthur whispered, stroking her hair. "I have got you." Sirens wailed, deafeningly loud now, cutting off abruptly as vehicles screeched into the parking lot. Footsteps pounded on the pavement, followed by the shouting of voices. "Police!" "Drop the weapon!" Two officers burst into the room, guns drawn. It was not Reynolds this time, but two younger officers, tense and ready for violence. They saw Arthur standing there, bleeding from the arm, holding his daughter. They saw Derek on the floor, screaming about his leg. "He attacked me!" Derek shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Arthur. "He broke my leg. That old lunatic broke my leg. Arrest him." "Sir, step back." The first officer commanded Arthur. "Hands where I can see them." Arthur slowly raised his hands, keeping one arm wrapped around Emily. "He is the assailant," Arthur said calmly, though his voice shook with exhaustion. "He had a knife. He was attacking my daughter. The weapon is under the bed. Check the girl." The second officer yelled, moving toward Derek to secure him. Derek fought them as they tried to cuff him, thrashing and screaming obscenities. "You do not understand. They stole my house. They ruined my life. I am the victim here." The officers ignored him, forcing his hands behind his back and snapping the handcuffs shut. As they hauled him up, Derek's leg gave way, and he screamed again. "We need a medic." The officers shouted into his radio. "Suspect has a possible fracture. Secure the scene." Paramedics rushed in moments later, filling the small room with a flurry of activity. One of them guided Arthur and Emily to sit on the edge of the mattress. As the medic began to clean the cut on Arthur's arm, Emily looked up at her father. Her eyes were wide, filled with shock, but the cloud of confusion that had shadowed them for 14 months was gone. "You came," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You really came." "I will always come," Arthur said, wincing as the medic applied antiseptic. "I am your father, Emily. That is a lifetime appointment." He looked over at Derek, who was being strapped onto a stretcher, still ranting to no one who would listen. The demon had been exorcised. The threat was neutralized. The ledger, finally, was balanced. Arthur closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath as the adrenaline faded, leaving him simply a tired old man who wanted to go home. The courtroom smelled of lemon floor wax and old wood, a sterile scent that Arthur Sterling found comforting. It was the smell of order, of rules, of a place where actions had defined consequences. 3 months had passed since the night at the Starlight Motel, and winter had settled hard over the city, blanketing the streets in gray slush. Inside Department 4 of the Superior Court, however, the temperature was perfectly regulated, and the lighting was mercilessly bright. Arthur sat in a gallery behind the prosecutor's table, dressed in his charcoal suit, his posture rigid. His arm had healed, leaving only a faint, white scar where the knife had grazed him, a permanent reminder of the night he had ceased to be a polite accountant. Beside him sat Saul, his attorney, who was there merely as an observer today. At the defense table sat Derek Vance. He looked smaller than Arthur remembered. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a cheap button-down shirt that pulled tight across his shoulders. His right leg was encased in a heavy walking cast, propped up awkwardly under the table, a souvenir from the tire iron. He did not look back at the gallery. He stared straight ahead at the judge, his hands clasping and unclasping in a nervous rhythm. The charges were read aloud by the clerk. Grand larceny. Forgery in the second degree. Aggravated assault. Violation of a protective order. Felony criminal mischief. It was a laundry list of failures, a resume of a man who had tried to cheat his way through life and hit a wall. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Miss Holloway, called Arthur to the stand first. Arthur walked to the witness box. He swore to tell the truth. For him, it was a redundancy. He had been telling the truth for 40 years. It was the world that often refused to listen. Mr. Sterling, can you explain to the jury how you discovered the financial irregularities in your accounts? Miss Holloway asked. Arthur adjusted his glasses. He did not look at Derek. He looked at the jury. On October 14th, at approximately 2 in the morning, I conducted a forensic audit of my personal finances, Arthur began. His voice was calm, devoid of theatricality. I discovered a series of unauthorized withdrawals totaling $58,000 over a period of 14 months. These funds were transferred to online gambling platforms and a shell company registered to the defendant. And this document? Holloway held up the power of attorney form. That is a forgery, Arthur stated. The signature attempts to mimic my hand, but the pressure points are incorrect. Furthermore, the document was dated on a day when I was out of state visiting my wife's grave. I have the toll booth receipts to prove my location. Derek's public defender tried to cross-examine him, painting Arthur as a controlling, senile patriarch who had gifted the money and then forgotten. Mr. Sterling, isn't it true you were experiencing memory lapses? The attorney asked. Isn't that why your son-in-law was looking into care facilities? Arthur smiled, a thin, wintry expression. I can recite the closing value of the S&P 500 for every day of the last 10 years, counselor, Arthur said. My memory is not the issue. The issue is that your client wished to liquidate my assets to cover his gambling debts. I have the emails. I have the bank records. I have the math. And the math does not lie. The defense attorney sat down, defeated by the weight of absolute precision. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The prosecution calls Emily Vance. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room opened. Emily walked in. She looked different. The dark circles under her eyes were fading, and she had cut her hair shorter, a style that made her look younger, stronger. She wore a simple blue dress. She walked past Arthur, offering him a small, brave nod, and took the stand. Derek finally turned his head. He looked at her with desperate, pleading eyes. He mouthed the word please. Emily did not look at him. She looked at the prosecutor. Mrs. Vance, can you tell the court what happened on the night of November 3rd? Holloway asked gently. Emily took a deep breath. Her hands gripped the railing of the witness box, her knuckles white. I went to the motel to get my things, she said, her voice trembling but clear. I told my husband I was leaving him. I told him I knew about the nursing home scheme. I knew about the stolen money. And how did he react? He snapped. He threw me against the wall. He dragged me into the bathroom. He had a knife. He told me that if I tried to leave, he would make sure no one else would ever want me. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Derek slumped in his chair, putting his head in his hands. Did you fear for your life? Yes, Emily whispered. She finally turned to look at Derek. Her eyes were not filled with hate, but with a profound, exhausting pity. I thought he was going to kill me. And he would have, if my father hadn't come. The defense attorney declined to cross-examine her. There was no strategy that could dismantle the testimony of a woman who had clearly survived a nightmare. The closing arguments were brief. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. We find the defendant, Derek Vance, guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern man with no patience for elder abuse, looked over his spectacles at Derek. Mr. Vance, you preyed on a family that opened its home to you. You stole the security of an elderly man and terrorized your own wife. This court has zero tolerance for such predation. He sentenced Derek to 8 years in state prison, with a minimum of 5 years to be served before parole eligibility, followed by 10 years of probation and full restitution of the stolen $58,000. Derek did not scream this time. He did not rage. He simply collapsed inward, a man whose bluff had finally been called for the last time. The bailiffs hauled him up, his cast dragging on the floor, and led him away through the side door. He did not look back at Emily. He knew there was nothing there for him anymore. Arthur stood up. He watched the door close behind his son-in-law. He felt a lightness in his chest, the lifting of a burden he had carried since the day the cable was ripped from the wall. The audit was complete. The liability had been removed. The books were balanced. He walked to the aisle where Emily was waiting. She did not say anything. She simply took his arm, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Let us go home, Dad," she said softly. Arthur patted her hand. "Yes," he said. "Let us go home." The ice had finally melted from the eaves of 42 Maple Drive, and spring arrived not with a shout but with the quiet persistence of green shoots pushing through the soil. It was a season of repair for the house and for the people who called it home. Emily Vance was no longer the woman cowering in a bathroom or the wife making excuses for a thief. She lived in a sunlit apartment 3 blocks away, a space small enough to manage but large enough to call her own. She had finalized the divorce in March. Her therapist called it reclaiming her narrative, but Emily simply called it breathing again. On a warm Sunday afternoon, she sat on the porch with Arthur Sterling. The window Derek had shattered was replaced with reinforced glass that caught the afternoon light without revealing the scars of the past. They drank Earl Grey tea from the china Arthur had painstakingly glued back together. The cracks were visible if you looked closely, but the cups held water just fine, which Arthur felt was an appropriate metaphor for their lives. The silence between them was no longer heavy with secrets or unsaid accusations. It was the comfortable silence of 2 survivors who understood the cost of peace. Arthur reached into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket. He did not pull out the old black ledger of debts and crimes that had dictated his life for the past year. Instead, he produced a small blue bank book. He slid it across the table toward his daughter. "This is for you," he said, his voice soft but steady. "The $58,000 plus interest recovered from the restitution order and my own savings." Emily stared at the book and shook her head, pushing it back gently. "Dad, I cannot take this," she said. "I need to do this on my own." Arthur placed his hand over hers, stopping the retreat. "It is not a handout, Emily, it is a foundation. You spent 14 months drowning in someone else's debt. Build something that no one can take away. This is the seed capital for your new life." Emily looked at him and tears welled in her eyes, but they did not fall. She nodded slowly, accepting the book and the trust it represented. She took his hand and squeezed it. The scars on her heart were fading, just like the white line on his forearm. Arthur looked out at the blooming dogwood tree in the yard. For the first time in 2 years, he felt the heavy weight in his chest dissolve completely. He closed his eyes and mentally shut the cover of the ledger for the final time. The audit was finished. The liabilities were gone. The balance was positive. This story of Arthur and Emily reminds us that the hardest battles are often fought within the walls of our own homes, and that the most dangerous enemies can sometimes be the ones we invite to dinner. We learn that financial abuse is a silent predator that thrives in the shadows of politeness and denial. Arthur teaches us that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an act of supreme love. Sometimes you have to be the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your own. Emily shows us that it is never too late to walk away from a toxic situation and rebuild your dignity from the ground up, no matter how much you have lost. Dignity is not given, it is reclaimed through courage and action. If this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to the reality of protecting your family, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. We want to know what you think. Have you ever had to practice tough love to save someone you care about, or have you found the strength to leave a situation that was destroying you? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below, because we want to listen to the feelings deep within your hearts and connect with your real-life experiences. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in your hearts every single day. Thank you for spending your time with us. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.